Chapter 67. The Faceless Woman in White. When Xu Qing, who had stepped into the forbidden zone, saw this scene, his eyes narrowed. An intense life and death crisis erupted in his mind, and all the flesh and blood in his body trembled uncontrollably at this instant. All of this came from the tall old man in red robes who was rapidly approaching from the distant horizon. Foundation building. The name of this realm instantly appeared in Xu Qing's mind. The might of this pressure was too great. Even though Xu Qing was still far away, the shock he felt was still astonishing. The other party's identity was self-evident. It was the Diamond Sex ancestor. This was especially so for the gigantic shadow behind the other party. That diamond body that contained rage was like a heavenly soldier, causing Xu Qing's eyes to sting at this moment. This made him feel the same as when he saw those Czech condensation rogue cultivators from afar in the slums back then. It was a similar feeling, but the degree of it far exceeded it. In fact, with just a glance, he felt as though he had been locked onto by the other party. Even if he closed his eyes, he couldn't help but imagine the tall figure of the other party. This figure seemed to be burning, causing his head to ache faintly. From a certain perspective, this could already be considered a psychological injury. However, Xu Qing had controlled his shadow many times, so he wasn't unfamiliar with this feeling. At the same time, he had made some progress in his first strike of the god statue, and his mental fortitude had grown. Hence, although he felt a dull pain in his head at this moment, it didn't affect his movements. He sped up even more. As he ran into the forbidden zone, he lifted his right hand and took out a handful of black pills before tossing them behind him. The black pill landed on the ground and directly exploded. After the 7-leaf medicinal herb juice on the surface dissipated, the spreading black medicinal pill dust rapidly spread in all directions, forming a vortex that caused the anomalous substances in the forbidden zone to surge over instantly. From afar, it could be seen that Xu Qing had thrown out over 10 black pills. All the anomalous substances that spread out were as dense as a tie, gushing over from all directions. The middle-aged man with thick eyebrows who was about to enter the forbidden zone couldn't help but pause. His expression changed, and he didn't dare to get too close for a moment. This black pill was precisely the failed product of Xu Qing's white pill refinement. At that time, he felt that it was a pity to throw it away. After all, it wasn't completely useless, hence, he kept it and used it at this moment. It was the perfect time. As the anomalous substances gushed over from the surroundings, the density of anomalous substances in the large area behind Xu Qing instantly became incomparably shocking. His figure then continued to gather the anomalous substances as he sprinted at full speed. Not long later, as the rumbling echoed out, outside the forbidden zone, the rainbow that was on the horizon earlier suddenly approached. After reaching the edge of the forbidden zone, the eyes of the Diamond Sex ancestor flashed with killing intent. He didn't stop at all and abruptly stepped in with a boom. The 2 Diamond Sect elders behind him also gritted their teeth and followed. Just like that, the 3 of them entered the dense anomalous substances. Although they rushed out very quickly, what awaited them was still the arrival of anomalous substances. There was even a large amount of poisonous fog contained within. Ancestor, this kid is very strange. The middle-aged cultivator whose left foot was badly mangled hurriedly reminded the ancestor. The sex ancestor let out a cold snore and fiercely blew a breath forward. A storm instantly formed and rumbled as it spread out in all directions, instantly blowing away all the fog in the surroundings. His figure didn't stop at all. He grabbed the 2 elders beside him and suddenly rushed out, speeding up his pursuit in the direction Xu Qing had left in. However, at this moment, the sky was already past dusk and the darkness was rapidly descending. Amidst the increasing chill in the surroundings, the anomalous substances that permeated this place were also denser. If they continued to fly here, it would still be fine for the sex ancestor. However, that thick-browed elder was already injured and he would feel uncomfortable after some time. Hence, the sex ancestor coldly spoke. The 2 of you, follow behind me. I'll go capture this kid first. As he spoke, the Diamond Sex ancestor circulated his cultivation. The diamond behind him roared at the sky and his figure quickly expanded to a height of over 300 feet. He then strode forward like a giant and ran. Every step he took covered an area of hundreds of feet that was the same as his height. As for the sex ancestor, he was standing on top of the diamond giant's head. From afar, if one didn't have a certain amount of spirit energy, they wouldn't be able to see the shadow of Diamond. All they could see was the sex ancestor standing in the air, as though he was floating, moving further and further away. Ancestor is mighty, Fetwo elders at the back had excited expressions at this moment. They had already determined that if the ancestor personally acted, that kid would die. I believe the ancestor will return with that brat's corpse very soon. The two of them were certain. However, time slowly flowed by. 2 hours later, the expressions of these Devira sect elders changed. As they sped, they looked at each other and saw the bewilderment in each other's eyes. At the end of their vision, they could no longer see the figure of the ancestor. Clearly, the ancestor had chased far away. It was just that they couldn't understand how body-refining check condensation cultivators' speed and ability could make the ancestor unable to deal with it even now. They were puzzled, but the sex ancestor was even more puzzled. At that moment, in a place far away from these two elders, the expression of the sex ancestor was extremely ugly. He looked at the figure of a youth in the distance who was currently running at an astonishing speed. Although the other party's speed was still inferior to his, the difference wasn't that great. Every time he punched out, the huge fist shadow formed by him would combine with the diamond fist beneath him. After the fist passed through the air, Xu Qing's body in the distance would glow and transform into a defensive barrier. Amidst the rumbling, although the protected barrier trembled and cracked, the youth inside borrowed the force to increase his speed. At the same time, due to the descent of night, the anomalous substances here, which were already very dense, continued to gather on the way where the youth had left, causing the surroundings to feel even colder. All of this caused even the Diamond Sex ancestor to feel some fear. He wanted to make a detour from time to time. This inevitably caused his speed to be affected, and it would take time for him to catch up. Damn it, as the expression of the sex ancestor darkened, Xu Qing, who was in the distance, had a pale expression. A large number of blood vessels appeared in his eyes, and the veins on his forehead bulged as though they were about to explode. His left hand was clenched tightly and the blood vessels on it bulged. It was a shocking sight. There was a scorpion tail in his palm. After the battle with Fire Crow back then, there were still remnants of his scorpion tail. However, at that moment, even though all of the scorpion tail had pierced into the flesh of his palm, the little amount of poison left in it was still unable to provide him with a continuous overdraft. It could only boost his speed for a short period of time. In his right hand was an incomparably blurry talisman. It came from Captain Lei's enemy. However, the talisman was about to dissipate, and Xu Qing was very clear that the enhancement from the scorpion tail poison was rapidly weakening. It was about to lose its effect. Fortunately, at such a speed, he could already see the familiar ruined city from afar. Closer and closer. Finally, at the instant the effects of the scorpion tail dissipated, Xu Qing's speed slowed down. However, he gritted his teeth and fiercely leapt into the air. On this dark night, under the demonic moonlight, his figure instantly landed on the city wall. This place was Xu Qing's target. He couldn't fight against the Diamond Sex ancestor and the two elders at the back. Hence, Xu Qing's plan needed the right timing and location. His timing was the anomalous substances in the Forbidden Zone. His geography was the familiar city. Humans were the reason for the strangeness in the city and the mutated beasts in the city lord's residence. With these, he felt that he had a chance of escaping. At that moment, the instant he landed on the ground, due to his speed being slightly slower, a near-piercing whistling sound instantly rang out from behind him. A gigantic fist shadow appeared out of thin air, directly traversing the distance and appearing behind him. The fist then punched out fiercely from afar. Boom! Fetalisman defense suddenly collapsed. Xu Qing spat out a mouthful of blood as his internal organs trembled. Some of them even shattered, and his injuries were extremely serious. The intense pain caused Xu Qing's vision to blur. However, he still gritted his teeth and charged forward, landing in the city. He then proceeded madly on the familiar streets. After a few ups and downs, his figure disappeared from the city. Not long later, the whistling sound outside the city near. The red-robed Diamond Sex ancestor suddenly arrived. His expression was cold as he rotated his right wrist. That punch just now was the limit of the distance he could throw out. Although he had the talisman treasure to block it and it didn't completely crush the enemy, he was confident that as a check condensation cultivator, he would be heavily injured even if he didn't. die from the remaining force of his punch, and the talisman treasure collapsed. Hence, with a sway of his body, he stepped into the city. However, the instant the Diamond Sex ancestor stepped into the ruined city, his expression suddenly changed as he heard someone crying. A cold aura suddenly spread out from the street where Xu Qing had disappeared. On this dark night, under the demonic moonlight and amidst the cold, a woman's figure slowly walked over from the distant street. This figure looked very small from afar, but as it moved forward, it grew larger and larger. It even exceeded the height of the surrounding houses, but didn't slow down. In the end, it reached a height of over 100 feet. She wore a long white dress and had extremely long black hair. However, she had no facial features. There was nothing on her empty face. Only the countless human faces on her long skirt were crying. After these cries gathered together, they turned into mournful cries that spread in all directions. At the same time, the white-clothed, faceless woman slowly walked toward the Diamond Sex ancestor. As they arrived, the crying grew louder. This scene caused the Diamond Sex ancestor to gasp. Even someone as powerful as him felt his heart tremble. He knew what this was, but the more he knew, the more reverence he felt. Therefore, he didn't hesitate at all. He immediately changed directions and quickly dodged. However, he hadn't given up on pursuing Xu Qing, so he didn't leave the city. Instead, he entered the city from another direction. That brat is only at the condensation realm. The possibility of him surviving after encountering danger here is extremely small. However, I won't be at ease until I see him die. The Diamond Sex ancestor's eyes revealed killing intent. His experience told him that his previous judgment was correct. A person like the kid, unless he resolved the conflict between them. If he couldn't kill him today and allowed the kid to live, then the future him would definitely be slapped to death by the kid one day. Hence, after changing directions and entering the city, the Diamond Sex ancestor immediately started searching carefully. He wanted to see the person alive and the corpse dead. At the same time, while the Diamond Sex ancestor was searching, Xu Qing had already returned to the cave he had hidden in. He sat cross-legged and meditated, his chest heaving. Only when he spat out mouthfuls of blood did his pale face regain some color. After wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, Xu Qing lifted his head and looked outside through the gap. His expression was gloomy. After a long while, he gritted his teeth and began to circulate the mountains and seas art. After Xu Qing recovered, his cultivation that was about to break through finally reached the critical point. I have to break through to the 7th level of the mountains and seas art. Xu Qing didn't hesitate and immediately attempted to break through. At the 6th level of the mountains and seas art, he already possessed the Kui shadow of a fledgling. For example, he could kill someone at the 8th level of condensation like the camp leader with all his strength. But it was a little difficult for him to kill someone at the 9th level. This made Xu Qing look forward to breaking through to the 7th level of the mountains and seas art. For the mountains and seas art to be so sharp with me, it should be related to the purple crystal. It's augmenting me. Xu Qing had long realized this point. At that moment, he took a deep breath and endured the pain in his chest as he closed his eyes to cultivate.